Well, good morning to my friend Peter, and we just started this morning off, and of course, me being a good military guy, I'm always on time, right? But uh, Peter, just let's carry on just for a few minutes discussion about your son, because this is fascinating because he's been on the news. Why don't you tell me what's going on there a little bit?
Well, the AP picked up this article that involved my son in Roanoke, Virginia. Oh, about a year or two ago, he just moved to Virginia, he just moved to Roanoke, and he's looking to establish relationships. And he saw this notice from this guy who said, "I'm an Afghani refugee, ex-pilot, just moved to Roanoke, trying to learn English. Anybody out there willing to help me?" And so my son, and it was a text, he had a text number. So my son texted him and had this conversation. And he's like, "This guy's my age, and well, I can help him with English." And I started using, explaining some terms to him, and they became friends. And it turns out that this guy had to leave his family when the US, in that disaster, when we withdrew. He was a reconnaissance pilot trained by the military, our military, one of 36 people, and he had to leave his family behind. It was like suddenly instant. He had to flee the country, and his wife, pregnant at the time, I think the article says, and he's got kids, and they're over there, and he's in the US and he's safe, but he's having a hard time getting his green card and getting to be able to fly again. And what really struck me about this article, Bill, was that my son has this huge heart. It's just, he's always putting himself out there to be available to help those who need help. And brings a tear to my eye. So what happened is that he and somebody else, a woman whose name I don't know, is also in the article. They wrote to their local Congress member and said, "WTF, Whiskey Tango Foxtrot, what's going on here? How can we help this guy?" And he hadn't even really been fully processed. He'd been processed when he came in the United States, but he had undone paperwork. And it was in this huge bureaucratic delay, and they got this thing moving, and now he has permission to bring his family over, but no way to get him here. At least he has his permission to get his family over here, but he has no way to get him here yet. And maybe one of the things that astounds me about this particular story is that it's a place where the left and the right in our American political system can agree on this. We all agree that we need to help these people. Let's get these 36 pilots and this one guy, they gave the pseudonym Quora. Let's get Quora and his buddies settled in our country and get their families over here. Let's figure this out.
Well, that'll be a continuing story. Kind of reminds you when I came back from Vietnam, and I got settled in, and I was out of the army, and then the boat people came, right?
Oh yeah.
So in California, we had in San Jose, which is over by San Francisco, we had all these thousands of Vietnamese refugees coming. The so-called boat people. They came into the country. They didn't know how to use phones. They didn't know how to get their kids enrolled in school. They didn't know how to get benefits, how to get a driver's license, nothing. And so I formed my own little organization with some other mailmen, and we got donated food and clothing and household goods, and we took care of the people that had children. We worked with just parents and children, and I did that for a couple of years. We didn't ask for any government assistance at all. We did it on our own, and at the time I thought, well, where's the government? It's like a little lowly mailman. Me and my buddies are raising the money and having events and collecting money and stuff, and so on. Anyway, it usually starts with one person, and that's, you know what, you look around, who's going to do this? If you do it, it works. All right. Originally, we were going to talk about other stuff other than your near-death experience, but just for, people will tune into this. Let's touch on that, because I think that's kind of the foundation of where you kind of went from. So when you were out of college or in college, you were kind of looking for yourself, and and then you had this near-death experience in the ice fields or the frozen waterfall of Canada. Can you just briefly kind of recap that, and then we're going to go into how that's affected you up till now? Because every time I talk to you or look at what you're doing, this is an evolutionary process. You're not the same guy I met 3-4 years ago, and you're not even the same guy as last year.
Mm-hmm.
And so people seem to think that, near-death experience is the, oh, I'm enlightened now, and so let's talk about that if you don't mind.
Oh, that's great. So a very brief recap. I was a third-year student, national student exchange program in Montana, and I went ice climbing and snow caving for a 10-day trip in Western Canada, and I made a mistake on the ice climb, and it cascaded into hypothermia, and I died on the cliff trying to fight my way down. I had a climbing partner, Tim. We were fighting our way down, and hypothermia is a progressive thing. I went through all the stages. We had 3 pitches to rappel down, 3 traverses to make, 1, 2, 1, 2, anyway, I'm not going to do the math. Anyway, I had a radical change as a result of my near-death experience. It's all in my book. I have that book back there. You can read about it for yourselves. But in brief, I lost all connection to my human self as I went through a hell of my own making, constructed by the choices that I made in my life, was completely and utterly welcomed and forgiven. The divine had been with me through all my experiences and had always loved me through everything I did. I ended up seeing my photonic self, my single self that is part of the greater field, the infinite field of light, which is the same as the infinite field, but I'm one little tiny piece of it. And I was outside of the field and superpositioned with it. I saw and experienced my sort of next level down soul, which is I image it these days in my head like a big, huge loaf of bread with kebab spears stuck in it, and lots of kebab spears, but the bread is much bigger than the kebab spears. The kebab spears are my lives that I had lived and that I entered into and saw into, some of them, but none of those kebab spears were me. I was the bread, but above the bread, I was this original cell of light that was being constantly, eternally called into being, which was superpositioned with the divine. I went through this hell of my own making, where I experienced all of this recent life, and all of the suffering from the point of view of the other people inside of them as they experienced the pain that I gave them, and was then welcomed. I was inflated into the divine being with infilled and inflated into a state of union, but this kind of union, there was still a little bit left of me. So I was in communion with the oneness. I was peace and awe and welcome, bliss, healing, wholeness, understanding, knowledge, love, beauty, light, awe, adoration, and all these components that we break apart on earth were a single thing. The infinity itself was beyond my comprehension, but I came near enough to it to understand that I am it. I had this level of still somehow not fully it, but I was in communion with it. I saw all of humanity's light inside every single human being that was equal to mine. I saw that I was the most beloved in the universe of universes and all the universes, but so was everybody else. There was no differentiation, but somehow I was particularly loved, but everybody else had the same particularity. It's paradoxical. I'm not sure how to explain it, but love is all there is. The divine being creates universe after universe after universe, and woven inside of all of it, underneath the darkness, it's like a veil that prevents us from seeing it in each other, but also inside of everything there is, that light is the divine. itself. I chose to come back to alleviate a level of suffering that my parents were going to endure, the loss of a second child. My sister had run away and she had died, but an estrangement like that is like an ongoing death where you don't ever get to go to a funeral and move on from. So I chose to come back. I was told that I would not live my life, but I could come back into heaven, but I would not live my human life. I had a choice of lives to live. I chose one that wasn't in the center of the purity of the light, but was inside the light, on the radiance, close to the radiance inside the radiance, close to the core of the light of all of these choices. And I came back an entirely different person. And I was 100, 150 feet up on this cliff. I was clipped to the mountain with a carabiner and a strap and a carabiner and a pin. The first time we were safe all night, I saw my body as I was approaching it and getting crushed down inside of this angelic being, which was also superpositioned to the divine itself. I was forced back inside this body. Suffering was the first experience I had inside me. I watched my body close and myself become trapped, imprisoned inside this body, where pain was the first experience. My brain came back online. I began to hear, don't die, don't die, don't die, don't die. And my body was being shaken, and I opened my eyes and I saw Tim's super surprised face, because he's like, and he's crying. And this was an entirely desperate night. I could tell you the whole story. It's high adventure. It's going to be made into a movie. It's so high adventure. It's like super drama. And I came back to my body again, but I was an entirely different person. And I had to figure out where I was and who he was and what I was doing. And some of that finally came back online. The rope pulled free. It had been jammed for hours. The rope pulled free, maybe a miracle, maybe it was a miracle, but maybe it was the angle I fell off the cliff, or maybe it was both of those things. I have no idea. I just pulled the rope free and we descended, and we self-treated for hypothermia because I was trained as a wilderness responder because I was on the ski patrol. So from that moment on, I was an entirely different person. And one of the things you mentioned, Bill, is the evolution. This is not a static experience. This is something that so radically changed me, and I assume everybody else who's had an NDE, especially to the extent that mine was, some parameters. How do I explain this? I'm going to ignore it for a moment, and it's ongoing for me. My perspective is so radically shifted. I keep going back inside of myself over my lifetime. I found that the only way out is in. I keep reviewing my story on the inside in order to learn more lessons, because it's the gift that keeps on giving. It keeps on giving, it keeps on giving. And it's this single oneness pursuit. And as I pursue it, it pursues me. And I have a lot in my life around it. And I'm just going to stop right there and see what you want to ask, if you have anything you want to say.
Okay, so you coming back, and it's like going to your closet and putting on a suit you wore last year and it don't fit, right? It's like the clothing doesn't fit you anymore. You were pursuing one direction, and then you end up going into theology or into ministry or something, and that was this growth process, right?
Yeah, I was going to be an architect. I was an English major. My dad's like, what are you being an English major for? Well, because I want to write about architecture besides just drawing. I have a pencil. I still use pencil. I was pushing a pencil on my dad's drafting board since I was like 5 or 6 years old, and worked in construction all the way through college so that I could understand the culture of construction, and also, how things go together with my hands. And then I was going to go to graduate school in architecture, which is what my sister was doing at that time, to go into the family business. And after this experience, I was walking in this field one day. I lived in a city outside of Boston, and my dad sent me out to survey a piece of property that he was going to put a proposal in on that was going to be developed into an outside mall. And so I'm out there, and I wasn't surveying it. I was making notes on what the land looked like. But as I was walking through, this is the summer after I died, I'm walking through, I take off my shoes, I'm barefoot. I'm like Mr. Barefoot after this. And so I'm walking in this field, and I'm barefoot, and there's trees, and there's birds, and there's butterflies, and blueberry bushes, and raspberry bushes, and I have this continual onrush of like everything is speaking to me. There's light inside of everything. And there's everything, especially everything living. There's like birds flying by, butterflies, and I'm totally entranced. And I went home and I said, Dad, I can't do this. Mom, over dinner, I was like, I can't, here's my report, Dad, but I'm not going to architecture school. I can't destroy nature. And he's like, what? I'm like, yeah. But I never told them what had happened to me. I kept it a secret because I didn't understand it myself. And there was no information I could gather on it in 1980. And I didn't want to be thought crazy. I knew my behavior was crazy. I knew that what I was doing appeared to them to be nuts. And they said, well, what are you going to do? I said, well, I'm either going to go into the monastery, which is like, what? Or I'm going to go to divinity school and I'm going to study mysticism. Well, what are you going to do with that? I don't know. So I applied to a bunch of divinity schools. I got into a bunch of them, and I went to Yale Divinity School, and the dean of students allowed me to have a 3-year independent study in mysticism, even found money to hire a professor for me for a semester. Like, I was able to take classes all through the university, and I never told her why I was doing it. And I found that by diving inside, I'd read the Yoga Sutras and Paramahansa Yogananda and a whole bunch of other stuff. But I incorporated an interior journey of Hatha Yoga with Kriya Yoga. And I had been exposed to what is now called centering prayer, because I went to Catholic high school that was near the monastery where it was developed. And I learned it back in the 70s, and I was already doing it, which was my lifesaver after my NDE, the only thing that kept me whole. So I went, and at the end of this, I guess in the second year of my study, and I had decided to go on for a doctoral degree. The dean of students said, nah, you have so much compassion, Peter. You should consider going into the church. I'm like, to myself, I don't believe in the church anymore. I don't believe anything anymore. God is way far beyond religion, way far beyond conceptualization, way far beyond gender. It has nothing to do with anything humans have ever invented, except for love, which humans didn't invent. But in my head, I'm like, how am I going to earn a living? And she was so nice to me. So I decided to try. I got ordained. And I lied at my ecclesiastical council for my ordination. And I lied in my ecclesiastical paper by saying that I was a believer, and I was not, because I needed work. I had a wife, and I needed to figure out how to pursue. This is what I figured. I'm trying to remember back to what I decided. I figured that I could hide inside the church. And it was the United Church of Christ. They were super liberal, ordained women back in the 1880s or 1870s, and ordained LGBTQ back in the 80s and 90s, and did a lot of social justice and the homeless movement. I was involved in the homeless movement and all sorts of stuff like that. But I figured that I could survive in a church of social justice, and which was not a mystical denomination whatsoever, but I built into my contract that they had to allow me time for meditation and yoga. And they asked why. I'm like, because it's my prayer life. And they're like, oh, that's weird, but okay. And so I embarked on this interior journey in order to find my way back to the divine, so that I could live a more stabilized self in the world. And then I left the church. So there's so much to it, Bill. There's like,
what was that decision like when you actually realized that you weren't living your authentic self? I guess
I was
something there.
I was masking. I masked inside the church, and I had to. I had kids. I then so I lived masked to everybody. My parents, my siblings, my wife knew, 2 friends knew, and I only told one of my friends because something happened that I needed. He witnessed an event, a mystical event, a Kundalini awakening, and the ramifications that happened over 3 days when I was a div student, that scared the bejesus out of my wife, who I had just married, and my buddy, who's still my buddy. I had to tell him, because they were going to institutionalize me. It was such a shattering for me. So or at least they couldn't blue paper me, but they were going to take me down and convince me to go into Yale New Haven Medical mental health ward. But anyway, I could tell that whole long story, but
that was a big thing, though. I mean, it was kind of like this spiritual crisis inside you. I mean, and you're fighting this thing without any allies. You're trying to expand without a mentor, really, other than books and whatever.
Dead people. I found when I was an English major, I read a lot. I'm from Massachusetts. I read a lot of transcendentalism in Massachusetts, and Emerson pointed me toward the East. And so I started, before this happened, I had a mystical bent anyway, but so I started reading in the Upanishads and the Vedas and all that stuff. And after my NDE, I dove way into that stuff. But when I went to divinity school, I decided that it was going to be dangerous for me to study the East, because I would risk losing my job if some of that stuff slipped out in my language. So I set all of that aside, and I found inside of the Western literature a stack of mystical teachers. Teresa of Avila, John Rusbrook, Meister Eckhart, Sousa. There's a whole lots of this. There's 100 of them anyway, and they were my mentors. In terms of learning to construct a language to understand what had happened to me, and also in order to formalize a language inside myself to begin to speak about this. But all of that's head stuff, and it's important for communication and for self-reflection and understanding. But the most important thing I learned from all of them is that the focus of breath and mind and breath, in all sorts of different forms, Gregorian chant, Qigong, Zen and the art of archery, all of the mind and the breath mental focus is the avenue back to the oneness of being. And that was the most important lesson that I then began to ritualize in my life, so that I would have a regular practice, so that I could carve my way back to my beloved. Because I felt that I'd been exiled. I chose my exile. I know that, but it still ticked me off that I didn't understand the deal that I was making. And I found that, and I still find that this is true, that as I dive deeper into myself and expand my own interior capacity for the presence of heaven now, that's one thing. Heaven becomes here and now. And not to the extent that I had when I was dead, but a lot more than I had when I came back. But also in the choices that I make in my daily life, whether I turn left or right, or make a good decision or a poor decision, which I make I'm a human being. I sometimes make bad decisions. But as long as I'm leaning into the light inside myself, that leaning into the light goes into all of my decision making, whether I make a left or a right or a good or a poor choice. If I'm in the light inside myself and I make a poor choice, say for instance, I step out into traffic and I nearly get hit. That's a poor choice. But because I carry this light inside myself that I've been cultivating for decades, I still aim toward the light, even when I make a poor choice. So it's not about left or right for me. It's about one intention. I'm always about the singular intention. And the singular intention is to the oneness of being, because I am not a human being. I appear to be one, but that's not how I experience it. I am still very human in all of my living, but on my inside, I inhabit this thing. I am not, I am more now here in the world than I've ever been before. I've worked at that to integrate, but I integrated by doing the opposite of what you might expect, not by trying to make it work in the world, but by aiming back to my home with the heart and mind and soul into the oneness of being. And the more I set myself back, breath by breath, yoga practice by yoga practice, the larger my capacity becomes inside myself, the more the veils, the Islam talks about 70,000 veils. I pull off veil by veil by veil by veil by veil. The light is able to penetrate more clearly, and I'm able to live inside of a bubble of heaven here now. I've never been trying to channel anything other than the light inside myself so that I can alleviate my own desperation for my own desperation and feeling of alienation in the world by turning myself back, always looking behind me into the one eye again and again and again. And it was my suffering in the world, having chosen to come back, not knowing what I was getting myself into and being ticked off about it, which was actually the driver for my interior integration and reunification. Does that hang together there, Bill?
Yeah, this is the guy I'm starting to see now. And obviously this has been a layer by layer by layer evolutionary process. All right, so you read these great books, you did research, you're on your own, and everything I'm hearing is, so far, it sounds like a solitary.
Totally.
Yeah, you kind of go in this alone.
Totally.
So, wow, from an emotional, spiritual point of view, because I kind of see them kind of mixed together here. You came back, and your life was not only changed, but it was almost like you were alien to your own species, your own friends, your own family. That's a transition that sounds like it's still going on, which I'm assuming, right?
Oh yeah, it's still going on, and I am still alien to, like, in a personal sense. My mom had a stroke a month and a half ago. She's 92. I came back the first time. I've died twice, and both times I chose to come back. I came back the first time to help my parents, but it turns out that I couldn't actually show them the light that lives inside them. And so my mom fell a week or two, well, maybe a month ago, and broke a tooth. And she said to me the other day, and I've been talking to her about this since I came out to them. I came out to them, and when my book came out in 2015, I mean, I talked to them a little bit about it, but they didn't believe me. After I talked to them about it in the early 2000s, after I came out to the church, there was this huge embezzlement, made statewide news. It was this ongoing drama in my town and with me and the church, and but they didn't believe me. Nobody believed me. I can't make someone see. So my mom asked me, will I have a new tooth in heaven? And I said to her, Mom, you won't have any teeth. And she said, what am I going to do without my teeth? I said, well, Mom, you're not going to have a body. Well, how can I be without a body? I can't tell you, Mom. All you can do is look inside yourself and find this core inside yourself of love, all the love that you ever gave away and all the love that you've ever had in your life. And instead of always worrying and living through fear, aim at the love, and maybe before you go, you'll catch a glimpse, because you've had glimpses your whole life long. Everyone who's ever loved you has been a glimpse. Everything you've ever loved is a glimpse. So I've spent my entire life, Bill. I came back as a messenger. I know there's a long, there are, that was what I just accepted the job of. And I found that I had no language when I came back to speak about the ineffable. So I went in pursuit of language. And I found that language will never carry the fullness of it. Here, I'm going to read you something. This is Essential Rumi. This is by Coleman Barks, editor. This is the last poem on the last page of this book. And this is the last 2 lines. No metaphor can hold this truth, that knows how to keep secret and when to show itself. All mystics historically only have metaphor, simile, myth, and symbol to speak about the ineffable, and it never, ever hits the nail on the head. The divine shows itself when it wishes to, and it's a secret keeper. And I could have spent my life asking why that is so and railing against it and get no answer. Rumi didn't know the answer. Jesus didn't know the answer to why. All they knew is that the answer to can I? And the answer is yes, you can. And I have been in pursuit of the energy itself. The Christians, they call it Holy Spirit, they call it Chi, they call it Prana. It has all these different names. The frequency, people call it. There is a capacity inside of human beings to grow a space for the energy to live inside so that it becomes seen on the outside and can be shared with selflessness. And when it's shared with selflessness, there's a maximum magnification that occurs between 2 human beings where the energy flow exists and you feel it for yourself. And when a person can feel it for themselves, then they know that this is part of them. And when they know that this is part of them, then they can find it within themselves. And when you can find it within yourself and cultivate it there, you don't need religion. All you need is the energy itself. And that's how I found my way to be essentially a monk, a solo hermetic monk living in the world. In one place, Jesus says, go into your room and pray. In another place, he says, make your eye single and your body will be filled with light. And those 2 things I grappled onto. And so instead of trying to find the answers with my head, and I'm definitely a scholar type. I read and I study. That's what my channel's all about. Not really. What my channel's all really about is this divine energy exchange. The channel itself is simply a mechanism to practice that in the world, to try to show people the light that's already inside them. And that's what I did inside of the church. That's what I did as basically the town's ombudsman for social services. Every town I ever lived in as the minister. And that's what I do in my daily life as often as I can, as I interact. Nobody needs to know anything about me as a person at all. Nobody has to have any head knowledge about anything spiritual. What matters the most is the energy itself and cultivation of the space for it to live inside, to indwell in the Christian language, and to share between. And the power of that isn't right decision or wrong decision. It's right living. It's right living in the center of the balance between the worlds, between my heavenly self and my human self. It allows me to live inside this space and to leak this light into the world that is not mine and isn't me, even though paradoxically it is me. It's just so much bigger than me. I found in the ancient writings, and the reason why I chose to study ancient writings is because I figured that the books were passed on hand by hand for a reason. You know, the Yoga Sutra is 5,000 years old. It's still in print. What does that say? Books fall out of print the week after they're printed and published because they don't carry the value. So I figured that the only way I was going to survive in the world is if I could find a peer group. And I went in search of a peer group, and I found that among the mystics, the mystical experiencers of the world who left a record behind of their experiences. And in those books, I found wisdom, I found knowledge, and I found practice. And I put the practice into practice. And it was through practice, even showing up for meditation practice when I was too busy in my mind for it to have any impact on me, just the practice of showing up matters.
Wow. So I don't know how that affects people watching this, because you and I both been around a while, and there's people who are going to watch that and say, there's this group that's in a box that's going to say, what, he fell by the wayside. And some people are going to look at this and say, wow, he graduated and he woke up. I don't know if there's anything in between. There's some people that don't know. And so I'm hoping a video and a conversation like this, we get the people in the middle there someplace and say, hey, open up your heart, open up your mind. You have something that you do online. It's called Not Church or Unchurch or
Not Church.
Not Church, which I think is trying to do what I'm talking about. Can you explain what that's about?
Sure. There was this fellow named Pseudo Dionysius in the 6th century, and he developed this thing called negative theology. And negative theology is that anything that you say about the ineffable is wrong. If I say this is pencil is good, I can't use the same word good for God, because it's qualitatively not the same thing. And so he proposed this idea that you could talk about God negatively. It's called cataphatic talk. And the cataphatic talk is that if this is good, then God is not good. If this is something, then God is no thing. And I decided I'd been thinking for a long time, skipping back to, I went to Catholic high school. I read all the Gospels in high school. It was part of my curriculum. After I died, turns out Jesus was a different guy. He changed too in my near-death experience. He suddenly sounded like a near-death experiencer to me, although I had no name for what I'm describing at the time. You know, I didn't know NDE I didn't know the name. So when I went into the church, I found inside of the Gospels the light that he emanated, and I spoke with that in the context of the theology that would allow me to keep my job. So I limited it. But all the while I'd been reading, when I was a minister, I read everything. So I read all of the Nag Hammadi texts. I read all of the Dead Sea Scrolls. I read and studied these things. I began thinking about the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, and the Gospel of Mary in particular, but the Gospel of Thomas primarily, because they seem to be more mystical. And I started seeing the Gospels through the lens, the 4 canonicals, through the lens of Thomas primarily, but more particularly through the lens of my NDE. And I decided that Not Church is a space of mysticism and deconstruction of Western theology, not using theology to deconstruct, but using mysticism, and also cross-referencing similar principles in Buddhism, similar principles in Buddhism, the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, the Vedas, the Lao Tzu, Rumi, Hafez, Kafir. And because this experience of communion or union with the divine is a universal mystical experience across religions. All religions I can think of, even Zoroastrianism and Sufism, Sufism, and I meant to say Sikhism, they all have a mystical person who's had a union communion experience, maybe an NDE, maybe another type of mystical experience at their core. This core is universal. And so Not Church, the purpose of Not Church is to help people rethink their Christianity through the lens of mysticism, but also to help people find language that's more universal to talk about their own experience. So I do a 20-minute talk. We have a live show. We have a chat about what I'm talking about. Recently, I've been using this book called The Peshitta. The Peshitta, it was part of one of the heresies that the church kicked out back around the 6th century or so BCE. And it is the Syriac churches. The Peshitta is the Aramaic Bible. So Jesus spoke Aramaic. It was translated, his Aramaic was written in Koine Greek, which is then translated into all these other languages and interpreted. The Aramaic is the language he talked. And in this one interpretation, translation by this guy named Neil Douglas Klotz, who I'm going to have a conversation with next week or the week after, we're setting this up. It's the most mystical interpretation I've ever read anywhere. And so I've been bringing the Aramaic, Peshitta, through Klotz's work into my deconstruction of Christianity, including the Beatitudes, the Lord's Prayer, and some other things. I'm trying to, with Not Church, on an intellectual level, break open people's understanding for what they can learn about their spiritual lives in their heads, and how Jesus, in his language and in his affect and in his effect of the world, affect in the world and his effect on the world, brought light to those who could hear. And in this way, the deification that the church imposed upon him at the Council of Nicaea under Constantine and his consolidation of power, when that happened, they depowered the mystical Jesus, who was teaching, you make them one as you and I are one, it says in the Gospel of John. And that's what I'm trying to bring back. I'm trying to let people cling to their historical Jesus, but show what he was actually saying, and not with the church theology, which is a power structure. And if you want to gain power over people, you tell them they all have a problem and here's the answer. And I'm telling you what the problem is, and I have the solution for you. And that's a power dynamic. And the solution is you can't do it yourself. You need this thing I'm selling you, I'm giving you. When in truth, Jesus is saying, no. The same thing is, you've already got this thing inside yourself. You are this thing. And so Not Church is an attempt to help people deconstruct themselves and find the divine energy inside themselves. So I spent 15 years in television. And when I was on camera, I wrote my own scripts, and I was on camera every day. I tried to emote the divine energy as I was learning to grow it in a space inside myself. And I started getting letters to this news. This is a news, it's morning news, and I'm in the middle of the morning news. So the audience is like, what's going on in Maine today? What's the weather?
Was it a 2-minute little program you had, kind of like in lightning 2 minutes that they were putting on or something?
Yes, it is exactly what it was. But it was when it finally closed, and I had it for 15 years. It was a 91-year-old institution in Maine that started on AM radio that had begun as like a full-blown Christian service with a choir and a band on radio back in 1926, and evolved into these pithy 2-minute productions. I only ever talked about love. But I tried to project through the microphone and the lens, because I'd been practicing my Kriya, and I began to focus in on my throat chakra some many years ago, and to try to use my prana to bring my prana up and bring it through my mouth and project it through my eyes. I had been working my my brow, and all of my other chakras too. There's a lot to it. And what I started getting a response from this audience, like of Muslims, Jews, Christians, Protestants, Catholics, atheists, Hell's Angels, grandmas, factory workers, everybody in the audience, people would start writing to me like, when you come on, my 2-year-old stops screaming. My dog comes in and sits down and listens. Everybody in the house quiets down. And I knew it wasn't the story I was telling. It was the light being emanated through the microphone and the camera. And so I decided, and I was pretty much free of the church at this point when I took this new position. So I wasn't having to deal with theologians, and my workaday world were engineers and producers. And I decided that not church, I would try to utilize that same communication technology for visual and vocal, undergirded, underwritten by the divine energy itself. But I'm not trying to manipulate people with it. I'm trying to get out of the way inside myself, non-attachment to myself, which is I came back non-attached to the world. That's been my biggest problem. But non-attachment to my false self has been a bigger problem. How do I practice getting out of the way of the light that is larger than me and allow it to flow and speak for itself? Because it not only speaks for itself, it speaks to itself. The light, when you see the light inside of someone else, you're seeing the light that's seeing the light in you is seeing the light in them. And when a heart hears, or a person experiences a moment of, you're out and you're seeing the sunset and you have this overwhelming experience of everything is beautiful kind of thing, that's the beauty showing you the beauty inside itself. That's the sound of the voice of the divine speaking through another voice to your heart, which is the ear of the divine, hearing the divine speak, not me, and it's not you. It's your origin and my origin in communion with each other. So there's this big sort of circular connection. And yeah, the guy that we met when we met some years ago at IANS, I've been in I'm continually on the path. I'm always walking, I'm always on the path. And I'm always growing because I'm always on the path. And I don't know what's going to come down the pike in front of me. I can't see that coming, but what I can do is continually grow my space of light inside myself so that when I take the next step, I'm stepping into that moment with the light inside me and allowing whatever is being presented to me in the world to interact with my soulful self, not just my human self. And I'm totally still human. Just ask my wife, she'll tell you.
That gets back that old Bible passage about you're never a prophet in your own home. And I think those of us that are on this path, you don't preach to, you don't lecture family, and then the people really close to you. You can't go there because people always see you at a limited level. Have you found that to be true?
Totally true. And I love my wife and she loves me, but that is 100% true.
Wow.
And we're still married after 35 or 6 years. I married her after my NDE, but I didn't tell her about it till after we were married the next day. And that was a disservice. I just want to say that because she didn't know how weird I actually am. She'd seen some things happen in our courtship. So she knew that I had eccentricities, but forewarned is well prepared.
Well, as I listened to some spiritual person that I met that was married, and he was basically telling me that the hardest lifetime basically is for these partners, whether it's the wife or the husband of somebody that's the mystic or somebody that's on this path. It's very difficult for them, especially if they love to. It's a hard understanding. It's a hard life for them. And those that survive, and I've been married well over a decade, I mean, excuse me, half a century. What am I talking about? A decade? Yeah, I've been married 10 full years, happy years. My wife says, no, we're married almost 60 years. Oh, yeah, but only 10 happy ones. Anyway, but it's very hard for these people that tag along with us. But let me throw
Yeah,
something to you.
sure.
All right, so obviously you mentioned incarnations, reincarnations when you were having your experience. So what's your take on this long term, if there's such a thing where there's no time and space, but this long term evolutionary process called karmic reincarnation and all that? What's your take on that? Where'd you go from and to on that? And are you still wrestling with that?
I live in this, everything to me in heaven was a paradox. And so I have a paradoxical answer to that, because that's just the way it looked to me. I had all these incarnations and I could see them all simultaneously. And I entered into two of them. And in one of them, I definitely was a spiritual person, but in another one, I don't even know what kind of creature I was, let alone a person. I don't know what I was, or where I was for that matter. When I was dead, I knew everything that I wanted to need to know. Everything in an instant, I had knowledge. I understood myself. To me, coming back here was coming to the dumb place. I am far more ignorant here than I was when I was dead. And so, is this a school for me? Not for my head. My task here isn't to care about what's next. My task here is to care about what's now. Because when I was in timelessness, that's all there was. So for me to worry about what came before in my previous incarnations and what might be coming missed the entire point for me. For me, it's only always about the pursuit of the light itself. So after my first near-death experience, I've had a series of other mystical experiences where I've been taken out of myself and brought into other heavens, realms, dimensions carried by the same angelic being. And one of these experiences, I was made of light, but I was carried to the next level up. And in this next level up, my lightness shed a layer. And it felt to me like I was in the fullness of divine perfection until I was carried to the next level, where another layer was shed. And I felt as if there can't be any higher bliss than this until I went to the next level, level after level after level after level after level. This evolution of my soul is the stripping away of the limitations of awareness as I aim myself back toward the awareness itself, where I will no longer be anything other than the fullness of the awareness. I won't exist at all anymore. I'll be back inside the infinite, as the infinite. And so, yes, to the layer leveling, karmic stripping away, but no to it too, because the aim is always singular. If I'm always trying to get off the dharmic wheel, then my effort is to get off the dharmic wheel. It's not to aim at the solution. It's to use the singular solution. It's to use the complexities to try to work my way through it, instead of always only aiming at the oneness. Because in this reduction that I was going through these levels, I could see the light. I could see it. I could see where I was headed, and I was always headed toward this one thing. So even in all of my subsequent mystical experiences, whether it's showing itself as darkness, light, or cosmic music, or some other form, it's always only still the singularity. And I don't worry about my karma. I know I went through a hell of my own making, and I know that I harm people in this life. I know I do. Sometimes they tell me. Sometimes I see it for myself. Sometimes I harm a person and I don't even know it. I'm not even aware of it, the pain that I cause in another person. I know that I'm accruing this in my bag that I'm carrying on my back. shovelful of sand by shovelful of sand. I don't mind that. I try to minimalize that in my life. I try to do as little harm as I possibly can. But what I expect is that when I die again and go back to where I was promised that I would be in paradise again, into the beauty and the love and the bliss, that if I have to pass through the metaphorical fiery sword that guards the gate, that Adam and Eve, they're looking back mythologically here, looking back over their shoulder, and they see the angel with the fiery sword. If I have to go back to the fiery sword again, so be it. So be it, because my aim remains the same. And the fiery sword that I went through was actually just a purification. I wasn't able or allowed to bring my pain or myself into heaven with me. As long as I clung to my own suffering or the suffering that I caused others, I couldn't go in. As soon as I turned my attention to the voice that was always, eternally, always speaking love to me, always making love for me, always me being made of love. As long as my attention is turned there, I am freed of my karmic burden. Whether I have to come back to another life, I don't know. If I have to get incarnated again, I didn't want to. For the longest time, I'm like, I'm never coming back to this hellscape. You can't make me, after my NDE. Now I'm like, if I have to come back, I have to come back. If I can help, that's kind of the deal that I have in my head. If I can come back as a bodhisattva kind of person, and especially in this time in human history where the heat domes are all over the world and the tide's rising, and I live on the ocean, and that's a real thing right here, out the mile down from my house. So be it. I'll come back, because even though I'm in an incarnated form, as I'm working my inner capacity for light here, I'm still evolving on the other side. This experience of moving toward the light inside this angelic being, that hasn't ended for me. That is still an ongoing, and it's not just this one time. There are other times where this has been my mystical experience. That's ongoing for me. I am progressing there as well as here. And here is this lower state of being that I'm not worried so much about. I try to live a life of love and kindness and compassion. I try to help and serve as often as I can, as my life has shown, as my life shows. But all this is passing away for me. I'm still an alien in my body. I still know that I am temporarily here. Every breath I take, I know I'm passing through.
Wow. Yeah, we're I think in a lot of ways we are on a mutual, even though they may appear to be separate, diverse paths.
Simpatico, bro. We're simpatico.
Yeah, and it's like a fabric, some threads have to go this way and some have to be a different color, but it's the same cloth.
Yep.
And we all can't be the same color in the same direction. So I don't know. I've come to the point in my life very, very young where I realized that Jesus and Buddha and Krishna and all the great ones kind of transverse the same process. They found this thing. Some call it Samadhi or the Buddha mind or whatever it is. Now, when you're having these experiences, some people might classify that as Samadhi experience. Would you?
I've had would be classified as Samadhi, yes, or Kundalini, yes.
Yeah.
Lots of different. I've had part of the curse of my life, and is that this began for me as a very young child, and I learned isolation and quietude when I made a mistake when I was 5, and I started talking about it, and I quickly shut up and sewed my lips shut about it. Every single mystical experience that I've ever had, and I know that this is true for near-death experiencers and other kinds of mystical experiences, is that it shatters the personality. You get shattered by this, and then you get reassembled. But there's a gift with it as well. And if you continue to pursue an interior path one makes oneself more readily available for more divine grace, which can give you not what you want, but what you need. And so this Samadhi experiences, these Kundalini experiences, how people want to classify them is fine. For me, language is merely a tool of approximation, not definition. And you can make yourself available to it.
So it's I've talked to a lot of people, and you probably get the same thing. They go, well, I want to be able to get all these powers and things. You know, they learn meditation because they want to, you know, channel. They want to read minds. They want to, you know, have all these great, you know, supernatural, mystical stuff. And I'm telling people, you're missing the boat. You should only be meditating to love God and be loved, and seeking things like, in my philosophy, even if I'm seeking to be self-realized, or I'm seeking to get out of here, or I'm seeking to be, that's something. And I don't want to go God seeking something other than just going to the divine source, whatever it is, just to go to the divine source to love. What's your philosophy on that when you meditate, and what you?
Well, when I'm on Jeff Bezos's $1 billion yacht, that's what meditation on the oneness is, and manifestation of heaven here now as a channel of the divine light. For me, the pursuit of the magic of mysticism for my own ends is like sitting in a dinghy. There's a dinghy called the puffer, and the puffer, a lot of people who have boats pull this puffer behind their boats. It's inexpensive. It's a little fiberglass thing. It's for really one person. You can kind of put two people in it, but if they weigh too much, then the water comes in, and it's super tippy. It's like this super tippy thing. And you can get a dinghy if you want one. You want psychic powers. You want to, manifest money in your life. That's totally fine. You can do that. But for me, I'd rather be on the yacht. Because it goes further and faster, and it's more powerful and more comfortable, and it gives you everything that you can't even imagine that you need. It gives so much more. So instead of trying to get the one thing over here, or the one thing over there, or the one thing over here, by ending my attachment to my own self, my own egoic self, I find that I get everything. I get everything. And so instead of trying to project out into the world what I want through my egoic mind, and this is a fundamental problem with humanity. It's also our great advantage. We have egoic selves, and that creates a survival situation for our physical body. And in groups, we become tribal with that self, and we become more powerful. And we survive in the world. We fight the mastodon. We have corporate takeovers, and we line our pockets. And great for the people who were there on that end of it, and not so good for the people who aren't, not so good for the mastodon. But it's necessary for human survival. I don't want to pick the one little things. What I find instead is that the less I attach to myself through breath practice and mental focus, is the more I have of what I didn't even know that I needed. And the light becomes permanent and permeating. It's permanent inside of me, and it permeates my entire life. Whether I make a right choice or a wrong choice doesn't really make a difference. As long as I'm a human, right or wrong choice, as long as I'm cultivating the light inside myself, that's where I'm living. And so my life is freaking magical, Bill. My life is phenomenal things have happened to me that are I could name drop, but I'm not going to do that. People I've run into who I have no right of running into or knowing, that sort of stuff happens to me. Doors open. I ended up in freaking television. How did I end up in television? How did that even happen? I have no idea. I didn't make that happen. I got recruited. It happened to me. When I was a div student, I never went to chapel. I was like the only kid in the entire Yale Divinity School who never went to chapel in 3 years. I never went. And because during chapel time, I'd go into the library when nobody was there and I would meditate. I would do yoga down way in the lower stacks, eventually getting me kicked out of the library for a month once because I got caught standing on my head in the stacks when he's like, "What are you doing?" So one day I went to chapel, and because this famous theologian from South America, a liberation theologian named Gutierrez, I'm blanking on his name right now, Gutierrez, blanking on his name, famous Latin American liberation theologian. And I went to chapel so I could hear him, but I needed to eat. So I brought a roll of Ritz crackers and peanut butter, and surreptitiously I started handing them out to everybody in my row and the people next to me, so that if I got kicked out, they'd all get kicked out. And so I had a conspiracy guy. And the guy next to me, who I didn't know, turned out to be the chairman of the philosophy and religion department at Albertus Magnus College. And at the end of eating my peanut butter crackers, he offered me a job. Like, how did that even happen? And so I became a TA. And
that was your only time, and your first time going to
the only time I was there. And I was doing something wrong, like at the time. And my whole life has been, because I'm not seeking any one thing. I'm also a driven person. I work really hard. I have goals, right? So I'm not saying that those things don't exist. But the manifestation I make in the world is through drive and determination, not through magic. I let the magic take care of itself. I let the divine lead me and show me and give me what I don't even know that I need. And as a result, my life is, well, it's extraordinary. Not because of my own doing, okay? I don't want that mistake to be made. I just stumble into things, doors open, and sometimes doors shut in my face. I mean, I've had plenty of doors close in my face. Oh, you can't go this way. Oh, yes, I am. No, you can't. Oh, yes, I am. No, you can't. And eventually it turns out, no, I can't. But I'm not looking for psychic powers. Those things just happen to me. They happen to me all the time. I'm not trying to read people's minds. I'm trying to see the light inside of them. And by seeing the light inside of them, then I have these psychic experiences. That's how it works for me. And I'm not a preacher. I'm not telling you what to believe. I'm not telling you what to think. I'm just telling you how I'm living and letting the chips fall where they may.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you this morning. It's always a pleasure talking to you, and I realize that you're a hard man to get to because you've been really, really busy this year. You talk about things falling into your lap. They come to you to produce a movie about your experiences. Why don't you talk about that just for a minute?
Sure. I've got to go in a couple minutes though, Bill. Just to let you know, because I got someone coming in. But so my book was optioned back there, optioned for a film 3 years ago by some major Hollywood producers. And I've been working with them for 3 years now, writing Act 1 and Act 3. So that's Act 2. It'll be the bulk of the film, but they had to have a backstory and they had to have they wanted an additional ending. And so I've learned in these 3 years to become a better writer under their tutelage. I'm now a much better writer than I was when I wrote that book, which turned out to be an Audible bestseller. It was a hard process for me. It was a lot of that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong, fix this, fix that. So where we are now is I'm closing in on my part of the contract. We have a new contract, a renewed contract, an expanded contract that includes an option on my next book, which is Act 1 and Act 2, and a potential for a sequel to the movie and or a streaming series. So, and what did I do to do this? I don't know. All I do is work hard on what the task is in front of me, and I work really hard. I drive myself because I am driven, because I have a passion that I didn't cultivate, that was given to me to be a messenger for the divine. So the through line through my entire life is to try to communicate love, hope, inspiration, peace, and opportunity, then the opportunity is that it's already inside you.
Wow, what a wonderful way to end this. I was going to ask you for some parting words. I think that kind of summarizes your life and philosophy. Peter, thank you. God bless you, my friend, and many more roads ahead. Hopefully, we'll be traveling soon together.
Yeah, I hope to see you soon, Bill. Peace and love to you.
God bless.